Colleagues, the 8th meeting of the Economic and Social Council is called to order. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Council will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 8, Coordination Segment. I now invite the Council to begin its discussion on closing of the digital divide towards achieving global digital transformation. And I am very pleased to welcome our distinguished presenters to these discussions. And I am also very pleased and also welcome our moderator, Amardeep Singh Gill, the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, who will conduct the deliberation. I look forward to an open, constructive and productive exchange of views, and really thank you to you for your agreement to be here with us and to moderate this session. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is an extremely important subject. We have the Summit of the Future later this year, and one of the key outcomes for the Summit of the Future is the Global Digital Compact. Recently, the third South Summit was held in Kampala and highlighted this issue as a critical issue in the context of progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So to look at this subject from the most important perspectives, we have three distinguished panelists, and I'll briefly introduce them. To my right, Ms. Paloma Gomez. She's Vice President of the National Institute of Statistics and Geography of Mexico, and co-chair of the Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. And then again, staying with the right, Ms. Silvia Montoya. She's Director of UNESCO's Institute for Statistics and co-chair of the Committee of the Chief Statisticians of the United Nations System. And to my left, Mr. Thomas Lamanauskas, Deputy Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union. So three prominent experts who have spent their careers looking at this issue from different dimensions. I would just suggest, with your permission, Mr. Vice President, that we reverse the speaking order and that we start with Thomas from the ITU so that he can set for us a picture of the context in which we face the digital divide and how we can turn that into an opportunity for a globally inclusive and impactful digital transformation. Thomas, what insights can you share with us around the digital divide and ways to address it so that we can accelerate the progress on the 2030 agenda? And are there any risks as we go ahead, particularly in the context of the discussions on the Global Digital Compact, where we look at the opportunities, but we also look at the risks and the harms to be avoided, and how can we tackle those risks? Thomas.
So, thank you very much, Amandeep, and thank you very much for giving this opportunity, and really appreciate this opportunity to be here. So, appreciating Your Excellency Ambassador Akan Rakhmetullin, Vice President of ECOSOC, and my fellow panelists, and of course, great colleagues who are here to discuss the important topic of digital divide, and if I may, also in the specific context of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, which I think now is in everyone's minds. So, and I think that's, I'll use in my notes in this initial intervention, this example of artificial intelligence to see how we can tackle the most prominent these days frontier of digital divide. And indeed, if you look only just over a year ago, it was when AI was shot to the global conscious and global discussion and prominence with a very strong achievements in the context of generative AI and abilities for everyone to use them in everyone's life. And indeed that created both fear and excitement. However, we all know that the fear usually sells better. And that's probably, there's no coincidence that such a movie like Leave the World Behind by Julia Roberts was the top #1 movie on Netflix in December. And if you haven't seen that, and if you're interested in technology and how the popular culture sees that, I really recommend. It's really gripping, but rather scary. But of course, I would accept that probably the discussion on the movie about AI-driven precision agriculture would unlikely would be able to hold attention as such attention as images of planes falling from the sky. But reality indeed is much more complex than that. Reality is much more complex than that fear of the technology. I believe digital technologies, including AI, if harnessed properly, can be a powerful source for good in this world. I'll just give you one example. AI can help mitigate up to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. In fact, digital solutions like AI can accelerate progress on 70% of all the Sustainable Development Goal targets. And AI impact is more than just statistics. It's about real people having real impact. For example, Mohamedou Kebe startup in Senegal uses satellite data to support smallholder farming across West Africa. In some cases, cashew farmers using Tolby's recommendation have increased yields by over 200%. I'm mentioning him because he is one of the winners of our AI for Good Innovation Factory last year. And I'll have many more examples of such impact on the ground. However, the risks of emerging technologies, including AI, are also real. They range from misinformation and deepfakes to bias to environmental concerns, because such technologies as AI are power-hungry as well as water-thirsty. These risks do call for appropriate governance models. However, one major risk is being left behind in this digital development. What does AI and new technologies mean for the 2.6 billion people who are still unconnected? Is equitable access to artificial intelligence possible when only a handful of front-runner countries possess nearly half of all AI-related publications and patents? And what does the future hold when the IMF recently estimated that AI will affect almost 40% of jobs globally? And as I mentioned to a colleague with IMF that I'll use that tidbit, so hopefully I can borrow it from our colleagues there. As in the previous technology revolutions, though, it's unlikely that we can stop the change. So what matters is to be prepared for it, and this applies to people and countries alike. So what is the role then of the United Nations and then for us, ITU, in this context? And I see three main areas of action. First is developing technical standards to make AI systems and other technologies safer and more secure, but also to encourage competition and innovation. We see this in ITU standards work, including in such areas as digital agriculture, disaster management, and health. Second, leveling the playing field for developing and least developed countries, including through capacity building. And third area of action is convening experts from governments, the private sector, academia, and elsewhere to work together. For 7 years now, ITU's AI for Good platform is bringing more than 40 UN agencies together with stakeholders from different sectors. And I encourage you to attend the AI for Good Global Summit that will take place in Geneva from 29th to 31st of May, with an AI Governance Day before that on 28th of May as well. So now looking ahead, how we will manage those developments. We definitely commend the UN Secretary General's efforts, and of course ably led and supported by Amandeep here, to advance international governance of AI and other technologies, including through the Global Digital Compact and his high-level advisory body on AI. However, in the meantime, we need to take action, and we need to continue leveraging existing work to harness AI for good. Last year's edition of ITU's report on UN AI activities highlighted nearly 300 projects, from forecasting food crisis to mapping schools based on satellite imagery in this context. We also need to tap into existing models and frameworks in the UN system applicable to AI governance. And the United Nations High-Level Committee of Programs Interagency Working Group on AI, which is co-chaired by ITU and UNESCO, has recently provided an overview of those to the UN Secretary General's AI Advisory Body. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come together to harness the digital revolution before. The World Summits on Information Society in 2003 and 2005 in Geneva and Tunis set the framework for inclusive digital cooperation as the Internet era was sweeping the world. The current WSIS+20 review process is helping us learn from the process so far and set the stage for the future. And as we look to the summit of the future, we have once again an opportunity to shape the digital world we want. Let's focus our efforts on harnessing the power of technologies, including AI, mitigating their risks, and ensuring equitable benefits for all. And with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Amandeep.
Thank you, Thomas, for your remarks. You mentioned AI, and there's no AI without data. And in the digital divide spectrum, we start with connectivity. There is meaningful, affordable access. There is then data, and there is now AI. So coming to data, Ms. Montoya, data powers technologies that are part of our daily lives. It's a key component of the digital economy. Could you share some insights on how this aspect of the digital divide can be addressed, and in particular the high impact initiative on power of data, unlocking the data dividend for the SDGs, is being implemented to accelerate SDGs implementation?
Let me see. Are you hearing me? Thank you so much, and thank you for the question. And it gives me a great pleasure to address all of you distinguished delegates on behalf of the Committee of Chief Statisticians. And I just want to drop a couple of lines about how we are. This Committee of Chief Statisticians of the UN comprises the statistical services of the United Nations funds and programs, specialized agencies, and the Secretariat, the regional and social commissions, which mandates include the provision of international official statistics. Rather than having multiple agencies involved with planning and logistical decisions, the CCS UN leadership brings a holistic, more strategic vision, avoiding silo approach in an efficient way to support the development of national statistical systems and the work of the UN Statistical Commission. Let me actually address this issue about the high-impact initiative of the power of data that was launched at the SDG Action Weekend in 2023. It was co-led by UNDP, UNFPA, UNDESA, UNICEF, the World Bank, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, the CSS-UN, an initial group of 15 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and supported by the UK with an initial $7.5 million. The High Impact Initiative proposes cutting-edge national data partnerships, bringing together governments, tech companies, civil society, donors, and others to use data ethically to revolutionize decision-making, accelerate digital transformation, and drive new economic opportunities for a more equal and sustainable world. At the heart, there is a new, more transparent approach to financing data systems, inviting to a much more strategic vision, collaborations between countries and donors, and move away from current fragmenting way of funding data to a much more holistic approach. The Power Data Initiative aims to unlock the data dividend to drive progress on the Sustainable Development Goals based on the power of data, and recent research shows that an average return of $32 for every dollar invested in a strengthening data system in low and middle income countries. Possibly because the official statistics are disseminated as a public good, their value is not well understood or fully appreciated, but it's also clear that with new and exciting developments, new sources of information and technology, there is an invitation to and plenty of room for collaboration in the data space. The goal is to achieve 30 national data partnerships by September 2024 and 50 by 2030, led by national governments, and with the significant financial and other support from donor countries, the EU system, and other stakeholders. As of now, many countries are already convening national workshops to develop their power of data strategies, and progress will be showcased at the Summit for the Future in September. And let me go to this point about the country's investment and skills. We're really aiming for countries to have the investment, skilled people, strong institutions, and political leadership to use data and data technologies in ways that transform progress on the SDGs. The 2030 Agenda has provided a unique opportunity to make the case to countries to develop their national statistical systems, put into place a national data infrastructure, take advantage of newly emerging globalized digital data sets, and other sources of information, such as civil society, for instance. But data infrastructure and governance will not happen by itself. It requires careful architecture design to be able to contribute to public sector efficiency and to better statistics to support decision-making. So I would like to conclude by saying that the CCS-UN stands by, as always, to serve the member states and their needs, coordinating statistical and data activities across the UN and the wider international statistical system, facilitating dialogues, knowledge exchange, technical standards, sharing of the best practices on data and statistics. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we turn now to our third panelist, Ms. Gomez. Could you bring us up to date on how geospatial information is being used to accelerate progress on the SDGs? And in the data universe, how is GIS data different, and how can it be leveraged by member states?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Excellency, Ambassador, Vice President of ECOSOC, distinguished delegates, fellow panelists. I am honored to be here, and as I mentioned briefly this morning, geospatial information describes where all things are and establishes a digital connection between people, their place, their daily activities, and their environment. Geospatial information is a digitalized version of the physical world, in which all human, economic, and environmental activity take place. Through the breadth of the multiple scales used for geospatial information, thinking globally while acting locally makes it possible to address the many development challenges and breaches that geospatial digital divide. Sadly, the most vulnerable countries continue to face the greatest challenges in collecting, analyzing, maintaining, and using timely and reliable geospatial and other location-based data. For this reason, the need to significantly increase the availability of high-quality, timely, and reliable data disaggregated by geographic location and several other metrics, and to exploit geospatial information and a wide range of other data is enshrined in the 2030 Agenda and other global development agendas. As a leading global actor, the committee is focusing its efforts and playing a crucial role in setting the agenda for the development of geospatial information globally and the promotion of its availability, accessibility, and application to address key global challenges. There are many ways of fulfilling that role, and the needs are increasing and are spread across a variety of fields, following the significant technological developments and the evolving maturity among users and providers. The accessibility and use of location-based technologies and analytical methods have the potential to reduce the geospatial divide over the coming decade. After all, our community generates geospatial information and creates maps and other visualizations that are being used to identify areas that, for example, lack access to basic services such as internet, healthcare, education, and water. The committee promotes innovation and partnerships to fill the blank spots on the map, both literally and figuratively. The committee is overseeing the delivery of a number of key work programs that will improve the availability and accessibility of geospatial information by all member states and will help to bridge the digital divide. This includes working with relevant stakeholders, including legal and policy experts, to ensure a sound, robust, and enabling legal and policy environment for geospatial information management. The anchor of the committee's work program, the United Nations Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, UNIGIF, is a key to strengthening geospatial information management across all nations, institutions, and agencies. It is a multi-dimensional framework that assists countries in providing the digital connection between a place, its people, and their daily activities, illustrating what is happening, where, how, and why. With this, I thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting the role of geospatial data, knowing what's missing and where, and tracking progress. Those are very, very important considerations in the context of progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So, colleagues, we've heard from the panelists. They've given you some food for thought. I hope you're now ready to make some interventions. Time permitting, we'll go back to the panelists for their concluding thoughts. Just be mindful of the time limit. It's 3 minutes for those who are speaking on behalf of a group of member states and 2 minutes otherwise. The floor is open. So the first speaker on my list is Suriname, please.
Thank you, Chair. We took note of the insights provided by the panel experts, and we must underline that in a world full of threats and challenges, the developments in science, technology, and innovation have the potential to provide powerful and indispensable tools to help close the digital gap and assist in achieving global digital transformation. As the impact of digital technologies will only continue to increase in the coming years, it is crucial that our people are able to leverage the benefits of this innovation. With all this in mind, the government of Suriname has a vision for digital transformation in Suriname that is embedded in our National Digital Strategy 2023-2030 plan. By 2030, our goal is to shape Suriname to an accessible, transparent, safe, and secure, digitally transformative environment that sustainably enables the prosperity and universal well-being of all citizens of Suriname based on the national and international collaboration. To reach our digital goals, we have set out strategic priorities founded on key action and activities and through collaborative efforts. We are therefore convinced that strategic global partnerships with public and private stakeholders and international cooperation will enable us to achieve digital transformation, which is a national and development imperative for Suriname. I thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your statement. Next on the list is European Union. Ambassador Sorensen, dear Peter, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished panelists and delegates, thank you very much. Allow us 3 points on the panel discussion on closing the digital divide. Universal access. We cannot speak of a meaningful digital transformation as long as there are individuals that do not have the access to the internet, as Deputy Secretary General Lamauskas pointed out in his intervention. Through the Global Gateway Initiative, the European Union has been focusing on exactly that in infrastructure and affordable services to bridge the digital gap. Secondly, access alone is not enough. Digital literacy is important. We must make sure that individuals, including women and girls, have the skills to use digital tools effectively. We must invest in education and training programs to empower individuals to thrive in a digital world and make sure that they can benefit from digital opportunities. And finally, inclusive innovation. We must foster innovation that considers the needs of all segments of society, make sure that the digital transition is truly inclusive, and we must ensure that the exciting advancements in technology serves as a bridge and not a divider. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Next, we go to the Chair of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, Ambassador Ana Neves. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. So, we are in a digital era. However, we are not at the same level of digitalization. As the CSTD, so the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, discussions in the recent years have revealed, The pace of countries towards digital transformation varies greatly, and the digital divide has become a serious concern for the international community. The world is currently grappling with widening digital divides. The concentration of offline population in regions like Asia-Pacific and Africa illustrates a disparity between different parts of the world. And as we move towards a more data-centered world, we often neglect areas where data are scarce or unavailable. Data divides lead to invisibility of marginalized communities, including women, tribal groups, castes, religious and linguistic minorities, and migrant workers. The overarching majority cannot effectively navigate or exert control over their data, leading to a divide in how various groups can safeguard their digital rights. If we identify effective policies for data and technology governance, we could foster more prosperous societies and significantly boost climate action. Discussions on data governance should be inclusive, and the United Nations provides a neutral platform for inclusive participation from all regions and all countries. Addressing the digital and data divides requires a concerted effort from governments, the private sector, the technical and academic communities, international organizations, and civil society. The CSTD, at its forthcoming 27th annual session, to be held from the 15th to the 19th of April, will discuss the issue of data for development, looking at benefits and challenges brought about by generating and using data, as well as data governance. I welcome you all to participate in CSTD's discussion on data for development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now we go to Mexico. Madam, you have the floor.
We're very grateful to Ms. Montoya, Ms. Merodio Gomez, and Mr. Lanapauskas for their briefings, as well as the very skillful guidance of this segment by our moderator. Mexico places highest priority on closing the digital gap. We believe this is essential for achieving the SDGs. Mexico would underscore the importance of cooperation to make sure that the benefits of the digital era reach everyone. We recognize the considerable impact that the digital transformation can have on everyone, and we call for joint action in this area. And we believe that a comprehensive approach which promotes the development of infrastructure, promoting digital literacy and inclusive policies are all key to empowering marginalized communities, and in this way work towards global digital transformation. We would call for policies and commitments which will promote access to technology so that it is accessible and affordable for everyone. We recognize the transformative power of knowledge and education, and therefore it is critical to develop skills and expertise in the digital field. Only in this way will it be possible to create the space in areas such as design, concept, innovation, using digital tools. And we would underscore the importance of having quality data in the process of global digital transformation, as well as the potential use of that information for sustainable development and innovation. We must ensure responsible management of data which respect the right to privacy. Considering the contributions made by the panelists, we have one question. Could the panelists tell us 3 priority areas which you believe that the Global Digital Compact should contain? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mexico. Duly noted the question. Next, we go to Chile. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you.
Chile recognizes the transformative power of the digital revolution to provide innovative solutions in a number of areas, in particular for developing countries. However, we understand that this potential must be addressed very carefully as we recognize associated risks, including cybersecurity risks and ethical issues, in particular when it comes to the use of AI. The omnipresence of AI in our current society, and as we see, all of the panelists have spoken about digital transformation today. This is a factor which inevitably will impact all areas of our lives at all levels. In that context, the interconnection of our digitalized societies creates new possibilities, but also new complex challenges. We must make sure that these new technologies are compatible, are available on an equal footing, and we must also address human and ethical issues. The automation and intelligent, smart technology can be useful, enabling workers to focus on more complex and challenging tasks. The meeting in Santiago addressed some of the issues the panelists have referred to involving digital transformation. We heard delegates and other stakeholders speak about needing to understand how these changes impact the labor market and an appropriate approach. In order to create jobs, we must ensure that all of this digital technology is affordable. Digital technology and AI are everywhere, and given that, we must recognize that there are ethical concerns, the need for digital privacy, because the expansion of the digital world is unprecedented, and it can be a powerful tool also for spreading hate speech and misinformation. We have to have ethical and responsible use of technology, given the possibility of AI to generate false information in a credible way. We welcome the various processes at the UN addressing this issue urgently, such as the establishment of the high-level advisor on AI and the commitment to ethical use of digital technology, as well as the Global Digital Compact, and the need for a resolution on the responsible and intelligent use of AI for sustainable development. All of these efforts are underway and we support them. We hope to participate actively in this process in a coordinated fashion in line with the commitment of our country to work towards inclusive digital transformation. Having said that, the management of inclusive data is essential. And so one question for our panelists would be, how do we address these new challenges respecting cultural and linguistic diversity and avoiding the risks? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chile. Next on the list is China. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chairman, the current uneven development in the global digital sphere is acute. The AI and the leap forward in AI and a new generation of information technologies has further widened the smart divide and the governance gap between the North and South. Against this background, the international community should uphold the win-win principle of shared benefit, undertake pragmatic and accelerated actions to bridge the digital divide and promote the early realization of global tech connectivity. First, we should commit to multilateralism and deepen solidarity and cooperation. We support that the United Nations play a key coordinating role in this regard and supports that topics on bridging the digital divide and promoting digital connectivity form the core content of the Global Digital Compact. Second, we should give priority to development in order to accelerate the digital transformation. The international community should champion openness and cooperation, take more robust measures to expand digital cooperation, accelerate the construction of the global digital infrastructure, and promote the construction of an inclusive, balanced, and win-win global digital economy and development community in the digital field. Second, we must uphold fairness and justice to make sure that no country or person is left behind. The UN and the developed countries should provide more support to the developing countries in terms of funding, technology, and capacity building, among others, in order to help them improve their digital infrastructure and enhance their digital development capacity. It is important to enhance the fairness and universality of the global digital and AI development with a view to ensuring that all people can share the benefits of digitalization and AI. China's Global Development Initiative has identified the digital economy and connectivity in the digital age as key areas of focus. China recently released the Global Initiative on AI Governance, which advocates principles of person centrality, AI for the good, equality, and mutual benefit, and calls for promoting AI technology for the benefit of the mankind. China is willing to deepen exchanges and cooperation with all others in order to better utilize digital and AI technologies to empower the global sustainable development and promote the building of a community of shared future for mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, China, for that intervention. And now, if there are no more speakers from member states, we go to our stakeholders. And we have one speaker from a non-governmental organization, the Man Up campaign. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Gail Davis with Man Up Campaign, focusing on the Creators 2030. One of the things that is very important here in what all of you are saying is when you talk about AI for good, we need to have inclusive in that arts, music, and film artists who can leverage technology in such a way that can support NGOs, the UN, other private sector, and all stakeholders in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And in order for that to be done, we need to have a division here that focuses totally on artists coming in, an arts envoy or arts emissary division with people who understand the arts and know the arts, as well as artists who are not just advocates, but bring other stakeholder artists together that can actually galvanize people to understand what the Sustainable Development Goals are and how we can achieve them and how they are important to every human being in the world. Because we stand in these doors every day, and the bottom line is, unfortunately, many people still do not know what the SDGs are. So if we put the SDGs in the hands of every citizen by galvanizing this, and also pay those artists based off of Article 17 in the right to the creative economy, and paying those artists and giving them a seat at the table with member states, supporting them, I think that that will give rise to all that we need. Thank you for your time, stakeholders and member states.
Thank you very much for that contribution. So we have a first set of questions for our panelists. Let's go back to them, and then we'll come back for the next round. So we had, I'll just summarize it for our panelists. We had essentially 3 questions. One was around the Global Digital Compact. So in the light of the discussions today on the digital divide and the need for a globally inclusive digital transformation, what do the panelists think should be the 3 priority areas for the Global Digital Compact? And colleagues, just a reminder, the discussions on the Global Digital Compact are going to resume shortly on 12th February. The co-facilitators, Zambia and Sweden, would be meeting with member states. They would be circulating some guiding questions ahead of that. And then on 13th, they will meet with other stakeholders. So this is a very timely question from our colleague from Mexico. Another question was around new challenges. So new challenges to diversity, to inclusion coming up, if I understood correctly, from recent developments in digital technologies. And one other question, which was perhaps not formulated as a question, but it was certainly in the remarks, is what are the risks that we are facing? Of course, there is a tremendous upside, there's an opportunity. What are the risks that we are facing, and how do we handle them? So let me go back to the panelists, and perhaps this time we can go in the reverse order. So, Ms. Gomez, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank the distinguished delegates and stakeholders for their contributions to this panel. So the 3 priority areas for the Global Digital Compact, I would say we firstly need to ensure access for all. Some of you said it before. This responds also to the question from the distinguished delegate of Chile. Everyone, the person in the street in an urban setting, or is it an agricultural worker in the field, everyone should have access. And UNGGM works with member states to provide the best location geospatial data to identify these needs and targets. Then I would say breaking through silos. We do not do this alone, and establishing stronger partnerships is vital. My committee has forged strong partnerships with the Statistical Commission and the group of experts on geographical names to amplify our impact, and we are actively seeking to cooperate with other subsidiary bodies of the Council to reduce the divide in front of us. And thirdly, we can do more with more, but there is a massive opportunity to really leverage what we have to achieve the development aims that we have. At our fingertips, we have Earth observations and resources that today we can use. This is why we have frameworks like the UNIGIF that can really help with capacity building in the implementation to improve data and geospatial literacy and help achieve the global goals. So I would say the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Implementation, most important. Capacity building as well, you highlighted that. I think, I'm sure in the GDC discussion that would be a key subject as well. So let's continue with the panel. Ms. Montoya.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you, Chair, and thank you to the delegates. And my 3 points are going to be eventually repeating, but I would say that the first one is about infrastructure, that is the one that provides access, and infrastructure in a dimension that is not only about to the hardware, but also to the dimension of human capital. And I think without that, as the distinguished delegate from the European Commission has flagged, we cannot have any discussion that actually avoid this. I mean, we still go to some part of the world that the internet access is very difficult. You have to stay late at night or work very early, because if there are more than a few people connected, it's impossible. And also access depends on what is a minimal definition of what you need to have as an infrastructure that grants that access. The second one, I think, is related to these standards, about the issue about the challenges, about the ethical dimension, the concerns, the need to have actually that set of standards that, as was correctly flagged by the colleague of ITU, UNESCO, actually the House is working on trying to advance on these issues that are related from digital standards to contents, to internet regulation, and to actually to make clear that there is a set of understanding what and how and what are the minimum parameters that actually allow to guide everybody. And I think that the UN is well placed to actually has been flagging the floor for this issue. The last part is about the governance. I think that the other issues that as opportunities emerge and as this collaboration and partnerships and giving opportunities, as example, have been hearing from the colleague here in Mexico and from what the UN High Impact Initiative aims to actually to put into place is to have countries' ownership. Governance depends on each context, but at the end of the day, it's about to put a framework to these interactions, to have the standards to deal with the risk and to seize the opportunities and have the chance to move forward. But I think that this is more challenging than ever, because the issue is not to divide and try to keep outside some sources of data, but try to find a way to include and to have a proper governance into place. So I think that from my point of view, these are the 3 points that are really critical and are critical for us as a community, as an international community. We are all trying to move forward to be working and taking as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Thomas, now back to you. Please think about the other questions as well, the challenge to diversity and the risks.
Thank you very much, Mandeep, and really appreciate views from member states and other stakeholders that shows importance of this topic to everyone, and it's especially great to hear member states clearly expressing that in their national strategies the importance of having the digital being part of an economic and social development, as well as great to hear from, let's say, development partners on importance of spreading that the digital around the world. One just free comment before answering directly the question is to remind all of us that digital divide and access to technology is a continuous question. It's a bit of a moving target. In ITU, our landmark report called Missing Link, or Maitland Commission report, issued in 1985, called for a phone to be within the reach of everyone by the beginning of the 21st century. By the beginning of the 21st century, a lot of people used mobile phones rather than the phones envisaged by the Maitland report, but then still the question of digital divide wasn't reduced. Now we talk about 5G generation and connectivity, and we again talk about some countries being covered, 90% covered with 5G connectivity, and some countries barely registering the coverage or not covered at all. So as technologies develop, in the same way, we'll keep having the question of digital divide. So it's a more question how to orchestrate the process of this joint common development that we are and keeping in sync with the technologies, and the most modern and state-of-the-art benefits of those technologies are within the reach to all. So first of all, and that's maybe starting to respond to the question of the Global Digital Compact, is the question of the process. And we believe that the process we achieve those results is as important as the result itself. And I think World Summit Information Society process, as I mentioned before, that was early in 2000s, set some of the principles of this process, including inclusivity, participatory approach, and multi-stakeholder approach, that make sure that all the voices are heard, and those who will benefit or those who will get harm are at the table to discuss how they will be harmed or how they will be benefit, and at the table agreeing on the rules of the game and agreeing on the process going forward. And we believe this is still important as we go forward in shaping digital future for all, and we hope there will be benefiting on that. Then second aspect, of course, is the specific outcomes we seek. And already mentioned in that regard, it's important to focus on the infrastructure. We still, in terms of connectivity infrastructure, there's still a lot of lack for the world to be covered. But it's also, and rightly was mentioned by European Union representative, is Ambassador Sorensen, this is not just about infrastructure. Actually, if we look about usage of the digital technologies, we see that around 95% of the world population is covered by 3G or better network. However, 2.6 billion are still offline, and 3 billion people are covered also by the are living in the areas that are covered by mobile internet but still not use it. So we have these gaps of what is called usage gaps that we need to fix. Those usage gaps are dependent on the skills. Those usage gaps are dependent of the affordability. In some countries, we still have the phone cost, mobile device costs 70% of income, and that means it's very difficult for the people to get access for those devices. So then finally, and I think that's finally in this context, is the importance of a capacity of everyone, especially on the national level, to manage the technology, to promote the technology, to develop that. As well, again, when we look at the AI, and our recent survey showed that 85% of the governments lack AI regulations, and only half of them have AI policies. So we still have this huge disparity of the capacity on the national level to manage the technology, and we think that's important to be bridged. So on this specific outcomes approach, infrastructure, skills, and national capacity. And finally, and relating to what we heard from a stakeholder about the artists and about the content, is indeed always reminding ourselves what we're using this technology for. And the technology is not for technology's sake, but technology is to give us those benefits of social economic development that a lot of us in this, when we sit here in New York, we already get used to, and making sure that those benefits of technology, from education to jobs, to social environment, to health, are accessible to all. So making sure, and I think that's a very important element to discuss when we're discussing the future of digital technologies, not just to focus on what technology we'll use, but what benefits that technology will deliver to all. So I hope we answered the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the panelists for responding to the comments and questions from the floor. So I'll go back to our speakers list, and next on that list is Costa Rica. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. For my country, Costa Rica, to learn how to use AI and digital technology must become a basic skill in our infrastructure, part of our hardware, so that everyone can benefit from it. From individuals to major servers to electrical grids, etc. I would like to refer now to three specific and important points for our country. Firstly, we've identified the challenges of digital technology, and we must reduce the digital gap by using initiatives which will facilitate access to this technology and to digital information, in particular in developing countries and in vulnerable communities, so that we can empower low-qualified laborers. Secondly, the importance of education and training for new skills. We would highlight the urgent need for education reform and professional training to satisfy the demand for our skills as a result of technological advances. Some of our colleagues have referred to this point as well, and we would call for the establishment of incentives for ongoing learning, continuous learning, so that everyone can adapt to the changes in the marketplace. Over the past 3 years, Costa Rica has made progress in implementing legislation policies as political policies to ensure that we have an inclusive approach for everyone through our focus on human rights. These include inclusive practices for all peoples, vulnerable groups, women, the disabled, workers, so that we can ensure equality for people in vulnerable groups. As the distinguished delegate of Chile pointed out, we were there last week at the special meeting, and this was a good source for exchanging information on these incentives. And I'd have two questions to ask. What practical measures can be adopted by organizations, in particular ECOSOC, to ensure that technological innovation focuses on the individual and are inclusive? And secondly, how can we take advantage of technology to help people who live in conditions of vulnerability? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. So just looking around to see if we have another request for the floor. 1, 2, 3, going on. Okay, so let's go back to the panel for their concluding thoughts. Dear panelists, you heard two questions from our colleague from Costa Rica. The practical measures that ECOSOC could take to enable, to catalyze innovation by individuals. And to the remarks of our Costa Rican colleague, from exercising the moderator's privilege, I'd like to add one question, which is, could we think of some examples where regions, countries have successfully addressed the digital divide, and what lessons we can draw from those successful examples, whether it is in terms of internet connectivity or in terms of affordable devices, or making sure that data costs go lower, or any other way you can think of how the digital divide in all its forms and manifestations has been addressed successfully, and what does that tell us by way of lessons for the future. So, Thomas, should we start with you this time?
So thank you very much, Mandeep. And indeed, maybe I'll start with your question, if you don't mind, and I think that will illustrate, I think, what can be done. And I think just the example I like to give is from my past experience working in the developing world directly as a technology advisor. And one of the countries which I'm very proud to have worked is Vanuatu in the Pacific, in the middle of the Pacific. I think, and the success, and they're actually now very proud of having reached across the very complicated terrain, and people with wireless internet and enabling connectivity for education through the mix of the telecenters and connectivity sources. I think the few things the few principles they really mattered. First of all, is participatory approach with the marketplace and everyone else. So the approach was changed from telling people what to do and how to do to really encouraging them to come together in a collaborative way, in a discussions way, together with the government to find the ways as a market to cover and to reach populations. So it's so-called universal service policies based based on a pay-or-play policies where the market players could decide how and when they cover, or they will contribute helping to others to cover. So this participatory approach that everyone is involved. Second was really community-driven approach. So again, the approach was changed from, let's say, building telecenters centrally by the government to distributing grants for communities to come and apply and come together and own their own development by saying, we're ready, we want this, can we apply, can you support us by subsidizing, and we even bring our own sources to that. So really making sure that the development is not put on people, but really comes and encourage the grassroots development. And finally, focusing again on what people need as an outcome, not on the technology. So the big change was done from focusing on, again, building telecenters to actually going and explaining farmers and communities and how they could find market prices for agricultural products, how they can find information about the weather, how can we find information on financing options, and how that is easier to be done during digital technologies. So shifting that approach from teaching how to use, if you will, simplified way, Word or Excel, to approach how to help to find that information that immediately matters to people. So I would say some of those ingredients, really community-driven approach from the grassroots, participative approach, bringing all the stakeholders and finding the right model, and focusing on the benefits of technology in everyday life rather than technology itself. I think these are important transformative approaches. And that also most probably defines the role, how we can help from global environment. I think the biggest help from global environment is to really ensure that those best lessons are shared, that they accumulated, and they're accessible to everyone. So for example, ATU does that from the Global Regulator Symposium, where we bring different policymakers and regulators around the world to share their own lessons, how to encourage technology adoption in each of their countries. We do that through our study group and standardization processes, where again, member states together with other stakeholders come together to both share and accumulate best practices there. And I think that's probably one of the best things that places like ECOSOC can do. It's really highlighted the importance of technology, not in a siloed approach, not when we discuss technology, but in every topic. We had great examples here in these halls on Transforming Education Summit, where technology took a center stage as a way to transform and help education. We have a lot of discussions elsewhere, including collaborations with World Health Organization on how technology can help health. ATU, for example, has a global initiative on health and AI with WHO and WIPO, where we're again looking into that. So really making sure, and I think that's a great opportunity here in this transformative, in this coordinating approach, and probably that's a symbolism of this ECOSOC coordination segment, to really make sure that this technology permeates all the topics that is dealt by ECOSOC and is showcased as a main means of implementation. I think through those, through that, we can help communities, we can help countries to camp themselves, and then through that, make sure that those most vulnerable people are really reached and helped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. We now go to Ms. Montoya. So those 3 questions, and the third one is the vulnerability perspective.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, everybody, and thank you for the insights. It's really very interesting to hear all the points, and I would like to take another side. So a little bit about this agenda and people and the intervention of the distinguished delegate from Costa Rica. Really, it's about the access. It's not only about the infrastructure, and it's about the access, but for that access, you need to have education. And we have actually, and the results that actually UNESCO and myself are coordinated as a responsibility of the agenda show that 9 out of 10 children in Africa are not able to read at the end of primary a simple paragraph and understand the meaning. And without that human capital, because the technology is used by some person, but a human being that needs to have the capacity to understand, to distinguish, to understand choices. And I think that it has a huge potential, but this potential is building on some other set of inputs and characteristics, and if we want to call it as a human capital, if you want to define that, is able to articulate and to take full advantage of that. The examples show that still there are challenges about connectivity and infrastructure in itself, but there are a lot of challenges that are related to the possibilities of that people to be to have the access and to execute and to be able to understand and to distinguish. And we're talking about very low parameters about that. So not everybody has the access to or are able to implement a DigiCom or even to implement very simple tests of digital literacy, because there are simple, we're discussing about much lower level that is basic literacy. Without an investment in human capital, I was happy to hear about the approach that Costa Rica is taking about the long life learning dimension, about investing in capacities over time. It's very difficult that we can put all the best devices and we can solve the hardware, but still that dimension about the human capital dimension and the enabling power to still keep it on site, that to address vulnerability and to address poverty and to be able to do that, still we need to not lose sight that these components are going to be needing to actually to have this investing in people that is at the center of the 2030 agenda. And I think that work of the type of what UNCTAD has done to estimate the cost of how much it costs to achieve the SDGs, they have identified 6 goals that are the pathway to the other ones, and they have found that health and education are the basic to actually to enable the achievement of the other goals. So we have one part of the job that is to set the standards, to work on the infrastructure, to facilitate the investment, but we just also need to have into place on site that there is a part that still we're lagging behind, and there is no other way to solve that dimension, that is also to keep those investments that luckily many countries are still are way ahead on that, and they don't have to be worried if children in some levels do understand simple sentences or paragraph, but it still is a huge part of the reality of humanity. Technology, as the recent Global Education Monitoring report has shown, and the recent report from PISA is showing that it has there are no universal recommendations. It has a lot of potential, and we have to look at those cases, but also there are some risks, and without that basic capacities and skills in children and in youth to be able to actually to seize the opportunity, it is difficult to actually to move forward. And in that sense, I think that some cases that we have seen, like Estonia, that has actually invested on various dimensions from cost to take care of the children, to actually to look at access, are proving that it's possible to enable and to use in a productive way to move forward. So I think that as a coordination segment, as part of our job, we really need to keep in mind that while we solve the problem, this is one of the challenges. We have someone ahead, we can be thinking, we have to give the governance and the standards and the processes, but on the other side, I would just invite to address vulnerability and divide, to also need to continue having on site and at the center the investment in human capital. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those remarks, that response. Let's now go to Ms. Gomez.
Yes, thank you. So I'll take Mr. Lamanuska's approach, and I'll start with the chair's question. With regard to some examples, I would say that the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, it includes policy, governance, legal partnerships, and data components. And we held a workshop last week in Aguascalientes, Mexico, where we discussed how the countries are making progress in the implementation of this framework. And what I see as a success is that the framework is being implemented not only by developing countries, but also by developed countries. And this implies that this framework is really being used by the countries in order to understand what the gaps are and how to integrate geospatial information for decision making. So, and that is accelerating new approaches, like, for example, data cubes and artificial intelligence, where they're already having a massive impact in the geospatial community. AI provides an opportunity for the production, processing, and modeling of geospatial information. And it's, of course, accelerating the process in helping us fill the gaps in our global map. But this is not only opportunity. AI also offers an unparalleled opportunity to widen the accessibility of geospatial analysis to many, making previously complex analytical methodologies easier to use in effect enabling the provision of big city ideas to the most remote and rural inhabitants. But as our colleague from ITU notes, this is not without risk, and UNGGIM is fostering good policy and legal arrangements so we ensure a sound, robust, and enabling legal and policy environment for geospatial information management. So that is a success that I see that it's already happening. And to Costa Rica's point, I would say with regards to how to map that vulnerability, there are several uses of geospatial information that could help in the use of new technology, for example, to understand when disasters occur, and if we want to map floods, if we want to know how many people are being affected, or if we want to relocate the most vulnerable, geospatial information has a big use in this respect. So we must ensure that we really foster equitable and inclusive and sustainable development that reduces this digital divide and not increases it. So this is why this explosion of technology needs to be accompanied by tools that enable and provide decision makings with analysis-ready data to implement those practical measures that you were asking about. Is that we need this data that is provided in a format that decision makers can really understand and take decisions to leave no one nowhere behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the three panelists for their comprehensive response. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll now sum up very briefly. I wasn't planning to give introductory remarks to save time. I think we have some time, so let me just offer some concluding thoughts. So it's very clear from the discussion today that the digital divide does not exist in a vacuum. It is a subset of larger divides. There is a financing for development divide. There is, as we were just reminded by our colleague from UNESCO, there's an education divide, there's a health divide. And if we do not have educated, healthy children who grow up in the digital world, then obviously we will have a problem within the digital domain. So it's important that the development process as a whole progresses. And that's why this opportunity at the Summit of the Future to embed the Global Digital Compact in a larger framework, the Pact for the Future, where there is a focus on reform of the international financial architecture, where there's an emphasis on peace and security, because that takes us backward if there are setbacks to peace and security. So that larger context is very important. That's our first takeaway from this afternoon's debate. The second takeaway is that the digital divide is not simply about the connectivity divide. In fact, as some of you have heard me speak, there's a funnel, there's a digital divide funnel. At its narrow end, it is about the connectivity divide, the 2.6 billion who are not connected, or the 3.2 billion where we have a usage gap. You know, they may be covered by some network, but they are not able to use. And that leads us to the next part of the funnel, which is affordable devices. It makes a lot of difference if you're accessing the internet from a smartphone, semi-smartphone, or from a laptop or a desktop. The educational opportunity that is there with a laptop or a desktop is much better than what you would have with a phone, which can perhaps help you with some search, some e-commerce purchases, entertainment, communication. But to get ahead in life, you need more than that. So affordability of devices, then obviously affordability of data. Data costs, we were reminded how costly connectivity is as a percentage of monthly income. Data costs are also very high in some parts of the world, which inhibit users from accessing the digital economy, participating in the digital economy. And then we come to content. This is very, very important at this juncture today when AI is set to take off. Most people cannot access content that's meaningful to them in their own context, in their own language, in their own culture, at the stage in life that they are. Children, even in the developed world, often access content that's not appropriate for them. So there is a problem within the context of the digital divide when it comes to meaningful, context-respecting content. Many parts of the world are poor, digitally poor, because they are content poor. They are not present in the digital world. And that obviously leads us to the data divide. It's not only about where the exascale computing is, where most of the data servers are, but it's also about who's generating data and who's deriving value from that data. So we still have huge gaps. There are large parts of the world where not enough data is being generated because the foundations, whether it's connectivity, the services, the digital public infrastructure that allows the data to flow, those foundations are not there. The literacy, the skills are not there to be able to generate data, to be able to participate in the digital economy. And that obviously leads us to the widest part of the funnel, which is the AI divide. There is no AI without data, and there's no data without digital infrastructures, without participation in the digital economy. When it comes to AI, there is the obvious question of access to compute, access to human resource, access to data for training of AI models, but there are other questions as well. Today, you see most of the investments into AI coming from a few companies, a few parts of the world. That has certain meanings for a certain meaning for the diversity of the AI innovation ecosystem, and it may have future implications for the digital divide. So this is why we cannot just say, oh, addressing the digital divide is about addressing the connectivity divide. It has to be all of these at the same time, because a gap at that end will translate into a huge digital divide in the future, where data and AI grow in importance in terms of the digital economy. So this sets up the Global Digital Compact very nicely for all of us. There is an important point, the last point I want to make, is the role of the ECOSOC, the coordination system, segment of the ECOSOC. ECOSOC is unique in the sense of not only are those working in the development space, the promotional space, reporting to it, but also those who are working in the protection space, whether it's social protection issues that the ILO deals with, or it's human rights issues, because without those protections, we cannot have a digital future which is open, free, secure, meaningful, inclusive, empowering for everyone. So both the promotional, developmental side and the protection side, the protection of the vulnerable, as our colleague from Costa Rica pointed out, to avoid anyone getting left behind, to avoid exclusion, that's equally important. And all these have to go together, and that's something that, Mr. Vice President, you lead so ably in the ECOSOC. So I turn the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amandeep. And first of all, I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists, Thomas, Sylvia, Paloma, for your really very interesting, very meaningful presentation, and also very thankful to all delegations for their active participation in the discussions, for your questions. And of course, Amandeep, I'm very thankful to you for your so ably and skillfully moderating the session. And apart from that, I'm also very grateful to you for your concluding remarks, really thoughts-provoking concluding remarks. Dear colleagues, now I would like to briefly pause this meeting to allow the podium to rearrange for the next discussion. Thank you again. Thank you to panelists, and thank you to the delegations. Dear colleagues, so let us proceed further on. And I will now invite the Council to begin its discussions on the way forward from the 2023 SDG Summit to the Summit of the Future. And I am very much pleased to welcome our distinguished presenters to this discussion. The discussion will focus on the key takeaways from the earlier sessions of the coordination segment and bridge the follow-up of the political declaration of the 2023 SDG Summit with the upcoming Summit of the Future, with the aim of highlighting pathways to translate commitments into actions toward the achievement of peace and prosperity for people and planet. And we shall now hear from the presenters for these discussions. I am very much pleased to give first the floor to Ms. Sakiko Fukuda-Par, Chair of the Committee for Development Policy at its 25th session. And I would like just to notice that the Committee for Development Policy, CDP, has highlighted that a just transition to more sustainable energy grids and more environmentally friendly economies and societies will need structural changes in industrial policies that will differ according to economic structures, labor market configurations, and social and environmental challenges in the different countries. At its next session, the CDP will discuss strategies and policy frameworks to harness opportunities for innovation, for sustainable development, as well as to conduct the 2024 triennial review of the least developed countries, LDCs. Could you please share with us, during your presentation, your insights on how to enact sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions to turbocharge the SDGs and leave no one behind from the perspective of the committee? Please, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much. It's a very great honor to be here. Excellencies, distinguished participants. But to answer all these challenging questions in 4 minutes is a great challenge. In trying to share insights from recent work by the Committee for Development Policy on how to enact sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions to turbocharge the SDGs and leave no one behind. I'd like to raise just 3 points, focus on just 3 points. First, this commitment to leave no one behind is, of course, both inspiring, but also poses a risk that, in fact, we forget that we need to also remember, we forget that we need to make sure that we are not pushing no one behind. And this is something that the CDP has emphasized for several years now in much of our work. In a transformation as complex as the one we are trying to achieve with the 2030 agenda, and in the midst of the climate crisis, the low-hanging fruit will always take us so far. But whether it is in the technological transitions or in the new uses for land geared at meeting some of the SDGs, it is critical to remember that disruptions of all sorts are pushing people behind at a constant pace. And further, well-intended efforts to respond to these problems help some, but make situations worse for others. A clear case of this is in the efforts, as has already been mentioned by the distinguished chair, to combat climate change. A globally just transition requires countries to meet their climate commitments and ensure that in doing so, they do not push poorer countries further behind by creating barriers to trade and constraining policy space, thereby excluding them from the opportunities associated with the expansion of new product markets or relegating them to the traditional role of suppliers of primary commodities. Many well-intentioned efforts actually have unforeseen negative consequences. A second message from our ongoing work on innovation ecosystems for development, structural change and equity, on which we will report to ECOSOC after our plenary meeting in March, has to do with making the 2030 Agenda's pledge to innovate people and innovate people-centered economies more than just words. The COVID-19 pandemic and the stark inequalities in access to vaccines and treatment show the important parts of our international domestic policy frameworks, including international agreements, technical assistance programs, and domestic legislation, have not always worked for people. In a rapidly changing international environment characterized by multidimensional and pervasive crises, and also by unprecedented degree of technological change and the rise of the digital economy, we cannot rely on outdated dogmas as the basis for policy making. The tools exist to build innovation ecosystems that effectively support both innovation and access to that innovation by those who need it. And these tools can mobilize rather than stifle the immense innovative potential in the global south. Finally, I'd like to refer to the CDP's proposal for a new generation of VNRs that realigns the reports towards their agreed purpose as vehicles for exchange of experiences and peer learning, so that, in effect, the 2030 Agenda implementation can be accelerated and be made more effective. The committee recommends that member states refocus these reports away from lengthy descriptive narratives of progress refocus towards more evidence-based analysis, lessons learned from implementation, discussions of policy successes and failures, identification of key challenges, and assessment of the core transformative elements of the 2030 Agenda, including the means of implementation. Reports should be framed under the concept of sustainable development as an integrated and universal with commitments to inclusion, human rights, and respect for planetary limits. So in a nutshell, there should be a new generation of VNRs with a new approach that are, 1, more analytical, 2, focused on key challenges, 3, incorporates an assessment of transformative elements of the agenda, 4, that is developed on transparent and participative process and debate, and 5, includes feedback loops. And finally, we recommend that civil society shadow reports be included in the review processes. A communique reflecting these recommendations is being prepared and will be issued presently and communicated to ECOSOC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I thank the Chair of the Committee for Development Policy. While introducing her, I forgot to mention that Madam Fukuda Par is also Professor of International Affairs in the new school. And thank you again very much for your input. Dear colleagues, now I give the floor to Mr. Robert Powell, Director of the New York Office of the International Monetary Fund. And before you proceed, I just wanted to mention that at the 2023 annual meeting of the World Bank and the IMF, it was stated that, I quote, prospects for global growth in the medium term are at their lowest level in decades, end of quote. And with increasingly vulnerability to shocks, the world is not on a path to eliminate extreme poverty by 2030. So the question is, how is the IMF supporting countries in accessing financing for short-term urgencies and long-term sustainable development needs? And what role can the IMF play to assist countries in harnessing the power of multilateralism to accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda? Thank you. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everybody. I think the discussions over the past 2 days have made absolutely clear that strong coordination amongst international agencies, including the IMF, but all the parts of the United Nations system, is absolutely critical. This ECOSOC coordination segment comes at a time when the goal of achieving the SDGs by 2020 looks to be an increasingly daunting challenge. The world is growing more shock-prone and fragmented. Growth in low-income developing countries remains too weak to put these countries back on the path of income convergence. Poverty and inequality are worsening, gender gaps may never close, and high debt and a liquidity squeeze are limiting policy space for many countries to reverse these and other worrying trends. So against this backdrop and the comments you made about the world economy, we have just this week edged up our projections for the world economy, but they're still well below where we've been over the last 20 years for growth. But against this backdrop, let me suggest a few decisive actions that should be emphasized as we continue on the road towards the summit of the future and, frankly, beyond the summit of the future. First, and most importantly, this really is the critical one. We, the UN system, should send a strong signal that countries need to take decisive measures to support strong domestic reforms to unlock stronger and more inclusive growth, ensure strengthened and sustainable revenue mobilization, and improve governance and transparency. Domestic resources for all the individual countries seeking the SDGs. Domestic resources remain the bedrock of sustainable development, and macroeconomic buffers must be restored after the recent global shocks of conflict and pandemic and to foster long-term resilience. Now, recent IMF research indicates that many developing countries could increase their tax-to-GDP ratio by up to 9%. Think of that, up to 9% for some countries, through a combination of tax reform and institutional capacity building. More efforts are also needed to cut non-priority spending and redirect financing towards health and education and well-targeted social safety nets and growth-enhancing public investments. Economically empowering women promotes inclusive growth and stability, and as such should also be a key part of the solution to the weakest medium-term global growth outlook that we've had in decades. So the IMF continues to be the largest provider of capacity development for revenue mobilization, deploying a variety of tools and data sets, and also collaborating actively with the UN, other agencies, World Bank, OECD, and others. And as announced by the IMF's Managing Director in Marrakesh last year, a new capacity development trust under the Global Public Finance Initiative will further boost our support in this area. So this is probably the area where the IMF is doing the most towards the SDGs, supporting efforts to achieve the SDGs. So second, the United Nations system should be sending a strong signal regarding the need for global innovation and coordination on financing for sustainable development among all development partners, governments, IFIs, the private sector, and others. Concerted action is needed as a complement to a country's own efforts at resource mobilization and reform. Absence of a comprehensive policy response from the international community potentially risks transforming near-term liquidity pressures into solvency issues down the road. Such a response must encompass policy advice, capacity development, and financing, and the IMF provides important and wide-reaching support in all three of these areas. As a cross-cutting priority, the UN system should also focus on risks to macroeconomic and financial stability stemming from climate change. Achieving the transition to net zero emissions to mitigate and to adapt to such risks requires substantial climate investment, and therefore the system needs to focus on actionable solutions to scale up climate financing, in line with COP28 priorities. Finally, on artificial intelligence, and we heard a little bit about this in the previous segment, AI will transform the global economy, affecting almost 40% of jobs around the world. Emerging market and developing countries face fewer immediate disruptions from AI, At the same time, many of these countries don't have the infrastructure or skilled workforces to harness AI for sustainable development, raising the risk that over time, technology could worsen both the gender and income inequality among nations. So that's what we've got to be careful of. The UN system should help advanced countries to prioritize AI innovation and integration while developing robust regulatory frameworks to optimize the benefits. For emerging markets, the developing economies, the priority should be laying a strong foundation through investments in digital infrastructure and a digitally competent workforce. And again, that was the message that we heard earlier. And the IMF helps such efforts through its research and analysis, and has just this month released what we are calling the AI Preparedness Index, that measures a country's readiness in areas such as digital infrastructure, human capital and labor market policies, innovation and regulation. Maybe I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Powell, the Director of the New York office of the International Monetary Fund. And now I turn to Mr. Matthew Gbonjubola, Co-Chair of the Committee of Experts on International Cooperation on Tax Matters at its 27th session. And before we proceed, I just wanted to remind that last September, the SDG Summit and the high-level dialogue on financing for development highlighted the critical importance of domestic resources and taxation, along with the urgent need for international tax cooperation to achieve the SDGs. What is the role of international tax cooperation in leveling the playing field and the mobilizing of resources to achieve the 2030 agenda? And how is the Tax Committee working to further these objectives? So, sir, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good afternoon all. I think to start with, we need to understand that funding is at the heart of the implementation of the SDG in all the countries. And history has taught us that whatever happens in any nation, no matter how remote it might be to the rest of the world, has the potential of spilling over and having a global implication. And with that, we see that it's important that international tax cooperation come in and ensure that we have fair taxation that works for all. And when we talk about fair taxation that works for all, we're talking about collaboratively coming to set up what will be the taxing rules, the taxing standard, that we ensure that, number one, that businesses are not taxed out of business, and number two, ensuring that everyone benefits from taxation. Now, when we look at fair taxation, we see that if we are able to establish in a collaborative, in a cooperative way, every nation will benefit from revenue in its domestic space without, number one, leading to the race to the bottom, that is unhealthy tax competition, and number two, also ensuring that there is funding across the globe, and nations don't have to depend on other nations to fund their own development programs. Now, from the point of view of the tax committee over the years, the tax committee has ensured by its work to spread across the globe fairness in taxation, dealing with very complex issues of transfer pricing, of taxation of digitalized economy, ensuring level playing ground when it comes to negotiating tax treaties. This are some of the areas where the tax committee has contributed in the past. Now, having an international cooperation platform, we further expand this at intergovernmental level and ensure that every nation has a bite of the pie without one having to look up to another. Now, how the task committee had further helped realize this is the fact that the task committee works in an inclusive way. Every idea is considered in setting the agenda of the work program of the committee. Everyone is involved, and also ensuring that we have plurality of ideas. Everyone's idea is considered, and it is ensured that the most compelling argument wins the day and drives the work of the committee. Now, the products of the committee over the years have been very useful to both developed and developing countries, and has helped in capacity building, particularly in developing economies. We also see that equipping developing countries with technical ability to deal with complex issues, tax issues, had also helped significantly to level the playing ground. The capacity building activity of UNDESA, using the materials produced by the tax committee, has helped so many countries to handle very complex tax issues. I think finally, one thing that is clear is that if the Agenda 2030 is going to be realized, all the nations of the world must be able to generate its revenue from its domestic sources. And the sustainable way of generating revenue appears to be taxation. And then the tax rules globally, therefore, must be fair to all, to enable whether small or large countries to be able to generate adequate revenue to take care of the basic issues of good governance, of taking care of poverty, ensuring people have access to energy, a good health system. And this all starts when we make tax a very fair subject that works for everyone. So, Mr. Chair, this is where I'll stop because of time, and that the International Tax Cooperation is going to help to level the field if we make taxation fair to all. Thank you very much.
I thank very much Mr. Ponjubola, the co-chair of the Committee of Experts on International Cooperation in Tax Matter, for his statement. And now I'd like to turn to Ms. Celeste Saulo, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. And WMO reported in the 2023 summer in the Northern Hemisphere as the hottest on record, with accompanying record sea level rise and surface temperature and record low Atlantic sea ice. How our weather, climate, and water-related sciences represent a key for the effective delivery of sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions to advance the SDGs. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear colleagues, I'm delighted to address you for the first time in my new capacity as the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. I am the first woman and the first South American to be elected in this position, and I'm very proud to be part of the UN family. The WMO is the UN agency, a specialized agency for weather, climate, water, and related environmental issues. The international cooperation that we facilitate allows societies to monitor, predict, and prepare for changes in our weather and climate that affect the full spectrum of sustainable development. Climate change is the defining challenge of our time. Earlier this month, the WMO confirmed that 2023 was the hottest year on record, with the global average temperature being 1.45 degrees warmer than pre-industrial times. While this was only the temperature for 1 year rather than the long-term average referred to in the Paris Agreement, this is the first year our planet has become so close to the symbolic 1.5 degrees threshold. The true impacts of this headline figure are felt through the heat waves, floods, droughts, wildfires, storms, and marine events that affected every continent last year. These events cost lives, hurt livelihoods, damaged economies, and undermined hard-won development gains, with developing countries and vulnerable communities being disproportionately affected. We stand at the intersection of inequality and climate change, and our strategies must reflect the urgency of our times. At last year's Sustainable Development Goals Summit, countries agreed to implement a plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, leaving no one behind and reaching the farthest behind first, a plan to course correct at halftime, so we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. National meteorological and hydrological services present a great untapped potential to turn commitments into action and accelerate the delivery across all the SDGs. The global meteorological community have a long history of a strong and sustained international cooperation, exchanging science, data, and working collaboratively on a near hourly basis for mutual benefit. But many developing countries, national meteorological and hydrological services do not have the capacity to utilize these shared resources to maximize the power of prediction and provide tailored services that support food systems, health systems, energy systems, water systems, national infrastructures, cities, and to enhance economic prosperity of businesses and individuals. I highlight the importance of providing accessible finance to support national meteorological and hydrological services to enhance tangible delivery across all SDGs. In this regard, I am glad that the Summit of the Future is recognizing the pivotal role that science and technology can play in advancing sustainable development and securing a prosperous future for all. I also welcome the focus on young people and future generations as those who will be most affected by climate change. And I welcome the spotlight on the need for enhanced collaboration in outer space, a critical element of how we do our work. The Summit of the Future must be about empowering nations, fostering inclusivity, and creating concrete, sustainable pathways for a better future for everyone. The World Meteorological Community are working together and, as part of the UN family, to unlock the potential of our science for all nations and communities, to build a better world for our next generation. Alone, we are a drop. Together, we are an ocean. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I thank very much Ms. Celeste Saulo, the World Meteorological Organization Secretary General, for her statement. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Amandeep Singh Gill, the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. Please, Amandeep, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by echoing the Secretary General's call for a rescue plan for people and the planet. And in that context, he's asked for truly transformative and strategic enablers to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And he believes, and I believe, that science, technology, and innovation and digital cooperation are one of those key enablers. To pick on some of the thoughts that my distinguished co-panelists have shared just now, when we look at domestic resource mobilization, when we look at tax to GDP ratios, there is, in this context, there is a micro aspect and there's a macro aspect. In recent years, we've seen that in some large developing economies, the use of data analytics and some basic AI techniques has started to bump up tax collections every year. And why does that happen? Because some of the routine work that tax inspectors do, and then often they get tempted by other things, that gets done by technology in efficient ways, in ways that are economical in terms of resource use, but also help to create the right environment for taxation to go up. So in addition to reform of the taxation system and other measures that my colleague from the IMF has mentioned, technology can play a very important role in domestic resource mobilization at the macro level. At the micro level, digital public infrastructure, base of digital identity, and payment mechanisms that are digital can enlarge the base for participation in the modern economy. Hundreds of millions of people have come into the financial mainstream on the back of digital public infrastructure. The costs of loans, smaller amounts of loans, which didn't make sense for banks. It was too much for them to focus on that segment of the population, have come down, and you can service smaller customers who are then able to generate more income, create more savings, and pump them into the domestic resource mobilization pipeline. So at both the macro and the micro level, technology is a great enabler of progress on sustainable development. When we look at the impact of climate change and what my distinguished new colleague from the WMO has mentioned, there is a very important aspect of resilience. We do not have a global disaster response system that covers all of the global population. Most people on this planet do not have early warning systems, whether it is natural disasters or man-made disasters. And that leads to huge human costs, that leads to huge material costs. If we are able to leverage technology, if we can put in place sensors, networks of communications, leveraging some of the platforms that we have today for communicating on a mass scale, we can bring down that cost. We can build resilience to climate change-induced disasters and other kind of disasters and free up more resources for development. So those are just some concrete examples of what is being discussed right now at this panel. In the context of the Summit of the Future, where you have these 5 critical outcomes, and there is a reason why the member states and the Secretariat have worked to create this kind of a framework, starting with the 75th anniversary celebration of the United Nations. You have this emphasis on generating more financing for development, including through reform of the international financial architecture so that more resources can be made available for countries that are distressed today, countries who face very high costs when they go to the capital markets or other ways to raise financing. You have this focus on peace and security because you cannot be taking one step ahead forward and 2 steps backwards if there are costs imposed, whether it is food security related costs, supply chain related shocks, or simple death and destruction that happens because of conflict. So peace and security is an essential strategic enabler for progress on the SDGs. And that's why it's there in the agenda of the summit future. And then you have future generations, because they are the ones who are going to grow up in this world in which climate change and its impact is real, in which digital technologies, data and AI play an increasingly important role and sometimes a disruptive role in terms of the jobs that get displaced, again, referring back to some recent reports from the IMF in terms of the impact overall on the future of work. So if we do not invest in future generation, if we do not make the youth partners in governance, then we are not preparing ourselves for the future. So that's rightly on the agenda. The reform of multilateral institutions, the reform of the way we work. In today's day and age, if the UN system cannot engage civil society, cannot engage the private sector, independent experts, academia in meaningful ways, then we are losing an opportunity. It is not about intergovernmental processes versus other kinds of ways of doing business. It's just a recognition of the reality today that whatever challenge you face, just take misinformation, disinformation, if we are not partnering with digital platforms, with media outlets, with civil society, we are not going to be able to get that done. So that's a reality for governments, and that's a reality for the UN system. So that's why it's there on the agenda, and it includes the governance of emerging domains of contestation, potential collaboration, such as space, which again my colleague from the WMO has highlighted as important. And finally, there is the outcome related to STI and to digital cooperation. The single most important factor in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals is going to be innovation, is going to be diversity in innovation. If we can create the opportunities for millions of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, economic entrepreneurs to participate in the development process, to innovate on everything from gender equality to plastics in the oceans to food security, then the efforts of the international organization, the efforts of member states to progress on the SDGs would get a huge boost. So this is perhaps the single most important enabler that we have within our grasp and that we need to focus on, and that the use of digital technologies recently is demonstrating is that it is viable, it is doable, and that it is urgent. So I'll stop there.
I thank very much the Secretary General of Envoy on Technology, Amandeep Singh Gill, for his statement. And dear colleagues, we've heard all panelists for this session, and now I'd like to open the floor for discussion and invite you to engage our keynote speakers in the interactive discussion. Please go ahead, those who are wishing to make a statement by pressing the button of your mic button. So the floor is open. I see a representative. Yes, we can start with Nigeria, to be followed by Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would like to start on the note of appreciating the speakers for the presentation. Very in-depth, I should say. More in particular, Director Matthew, not because he's a Nigerian, but specifically because he highlighted the collaboration needed in international taxation for sustainable development to occur. Of course, back home, I did share some of the I did shed light on what we've done back home in terms of strengthening institutions as regards having easing access and creating an enabling environment for FDI to flow. Because very often when you talk about framework, international framework convention, on taxation, the impression most multinational corporations have is, you're trying to suffocate investment. But ideally, like the 4 executive orders our president signed, he signed it specifically to address the issue of multiple taxation. So when we talk about having a global, a uniform policy on taxation through a UN platform, is also to protect multinational corporations and not just economists from the South. So I must thank Mr. Matthew for his remarks, and in our intervention during the discussion, internal discussions on the Pact for the Future, these are the views we want, these are the issues we want captured in when we talk about IFA reform. We want explicitly for issues of taxation to receive the requisite attention it deserves in the document, because we are saying it's a pact for the future. We must have that convention, framework convention for uniformity in tax. And just turning to the representative from the World Bank, yes, corruption is an issue. We totally agree, and I did say that in my remarks yesterday. And when we talk corruption, I went to the bank today again, and just to get cash withdrawal, and I was asked, what am I doing with the cash? And obviously this is the funds there come from my mission to my account for my monthly payment. And but they asked, and it's a bit confusing that funds leave the global South and get to some certain countries, and then they don't ask questions. But when the funds arrive, then they raise the red flag that corruption. For me, I pose the rhetoric for us to decide, when they often throw the book at the global South, that corruption or Africa corruption, is a shared responsibility really, and the global banking sector has a role to play. So I would like to solicit the response of the representative of the World Bank, how the global banking sector can support the process of curbing corruption, because there's a shared responsibility here. And I did say yesterday, even when they talk about repatriation of illicit finances, they never broach the topic of the accruing interest, as the case may be, over time. So these are issues we have to be deliberate in addressing these things, because Africa has, if we check the financial leakages, there's enough to take care of the needs of Africa, including the debts. I did share the data yesterday, but I see I'm out of time. I thank you once again, and I look forward to your feedback. Cheers.
I thank the representative of Nigeria for his comments and questions, and now I turn the floor to Mexico, to be followed by Canada.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. I'd like to express Mexico's thanks to the panelists for their very valuable comments. This space is essential so that we can share the priorities and our views as we go into negotiations on the summit for the future. We'd also like to thank Namibia and Germany for their hard work in providing us with the zero draft. We believe that this text is a good starting point, and it is a comprehensive document which reflects the priorities of states which are members, under the premise that the future should be person-centered and focus on the well-being of people. In line with the SDGs that we've discussed here, we welcome the fact that there is an aim to eradicate poverty and hunger and to accelerate environmental efforts and address the adverse impacts of climate change effectively. Moreover, it also highlights the need for building inclusive, peaceful, and fair societies based on the rule of law, good governance, and human rights. That notwithstanding, in order genuinely to speed up the implementation of Agenda 2030 and to see the summit as the starting point for a more prosperous future, we would urge states and the many interested stakeholders to be very ambitious and involved during the negotiating process. We're looking for a document which goes beyond reiterating commitments and which is aware of the urgency that humanity currently faces. we are facing a number of challenges which we cannot overcome without international cooperation which is strong and which supports multilateralism and strengthens the UN. Moreover, we believe that the time has come to turn to action. It is a time to begin actions and to stop just making general comments. We've already gone through that process. It will not be easy, nor will the path be short. We look forward to consultations next week to negotiate this draft and to put forward specific proposals with clear-cut timelines that we will all take back to capitals. We reiterate Mexico's commitment to work actively in the preparatory efforts leading up to the conference. We hope that this will be an inclusive process so that we can address the global challenges. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for her statement, and I turn the floor to the permanent representative of Canada. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Mr. Vice President, let me thank the panel this afternoon for their contributions and for the two-day effort overall. I think it's been a good discussion, and I think it's important that we all not only take note of it, but as I agree with my Mexican colleague, that it's not just about a matter of what's in the document in the Summit of the Future, but what our government's really prepared to do to make the kind of progress that's necessary. Let me just make a couple of comments. The first one is to do with the very helpful comments at the beginning from Madam Fukuda Harris. I think it's really important to stress the need to take the process of national reports, as she put it, from the perspective of simply giving a narrative, and the narratives have no particular form to them. I mean, they depend on what a government wants to do and what it wants to say. And so at some point you have to say, okay, we've done that. Now, thank you. We've been through this process now for a few years. Let's actually try and establish a standard and objective process that governments will go through in answering certain questions and in providing a certain degree of measurement. I think the reason for doing that is to allow governments to not just show off, if you will, but also to allow governments to respond very clearly to what needs to be done and how much further there is to go. And if we can't, in fact, get that from these statements, then we're going to have to find another way to assess how we're doing, because the critical problem on the COP agreement and the critical problem facing many agreements that we've reached is that they're not enforceable. And so apart from economic incentives and so on, which we apply, we don't have any other way of assessing how we're actually doing. So it's really important that we encourage that evolution of the process to one that is really attempting to get to a common approach and a common assessment of how we're doing. I've said before in ECOSOC meetings, like many people in this room, I go on the scale every morning and I measure how I'm doing. Sometimes the news is good, sometimes it's very bad, but at least I do it. If you want to have the year's readout, I'll be happy to provide it to you next year. But I think it's important that we accept the discipline that is implied in getting to a common approach and a common assessment of how actually we're doing and what we intend to do as national governments to improve our performance. The last point is, the key thing about the SDGs is they apply to each and every one of us. They're not being delivered from on high to developing countries to say, this is what more you have to do. It is being delivered to every nation state to say, this is what we have to do together. Because everything we do today in the world is global. It applies to every one of us, whether it's emissions or adaptation or establishing conditions for resilience or dealing with all of the other aspects of the SDGs. The SDGs apply to Canada as much as they apply to any other country in the world. We are beginning to accept that discipline and understand its requirements. And I think we really need to make sure that we embrace it more fully as we go forward in coming to grips with these assessments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have requests for the floor from representative of the NGO Man Up campaign. Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies and NGOs and all esteemed parties. My name is Gail Davis. I'm with the Man Up campaign, recognizing the Creators 2030 under it. Here is the thing, I have a question for all of us. Everything that all of you said there is absolutely on point. But here's the thing, if we used a multi-stakeholder approach, where and when I say a multi-stakeholder approach, I mean youth, I mean citizens, I mean educators, scientists, UN agencies, UN member states, educators, the whole thing per country, okay, with the right private sector involved. How can we create something like that where the whole entire country is taken care of? We listen to our citizens on the ground of what they need, okay? We understand the micro, macro finance of it all. We find out what the digital divide is and what the infrastructure is needed to put into that. And we begin to do that seamlessly and right away, understanding each country's needs. That would be a model, if we developed it, could be retrofitted to fit each country. How can we put that into action? And how can we use the banking and the taxation to hold private sector accountable for that? And how can we do that coming from the IMF? Over to you, Mr. Powell, over to the gentleman who heads with Digital Divide, and the meteorological woman as well. Thank you.
Thank you. At this stage, let me come back and address our panelists, and I would like to start with the first question came from Nigerian delegation and about tax cooperation, and Matthew, first to you, and then to Robert, to you, and then to other colleagues on other questions. Please, you have the floor. Matthew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. And I think the question is very clear. When we together design what the tax space should be, it becomes easy for all of us to stick to our own part of the bargain and ensure that things are done in a cooperative way. But where tax rules are designed and handed down, you find that it's difficult for those who are not part of the making of the rules to enforce. And I think that is what the agenda for international cooperation in tax issues in the UN speaks to, that every nation, no matter what level of development or size of economy, come together and cooperatively, collaboratively design a system that works for all, and then becomes easy to have a system that is self-policing and does not require one nation being pushed before getting the right things done. And then finally, at that, on the issue of illicit financial flow, which appears to work more against the countries in the South. Again, if all of us agree how to deal with movement of money, and we all stick to that, and are not selective in implementing the rules, I think it's going to help to achieve what the delegate from Nigeria had spoken about, that we are able to stamp out illegal movement of funds from one country to another country. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Matthew. And if I may now to turn to Robert for your comment.
Just on the issue of taxation, my friend here, I should point out I'm from the International Monetary Fund, I'm not from the World Bank. So my friend from Côte d'Ivoire. The issue of corruption and governance, there's no simple answer to this. And all countries are working on it very closely, and illicit tax flows and getting regulations clear and enforcing them. There's no simple answer. But there's a lot of work going on, certainly from the IMF side, working, our legal affairs experts and our fiscal affairs experts working with individual countries on the ground to help with enforcement, help with tax administration, and help with transparency. And like I said, there's no simple answer to your question. I mean, I did want to make one wider point, if now's a good time to make it. I mean, listening, a critical thing is, and this is to come back to this issue of why domestic revenue mobilization or domestic resources is so critical. Before the pandemic, the IMF estimated that most emerging market economies, so think middle-income countries if you like, could finance the additional spending needed to achieve the SDGs by domestic actions. Now, while most low-income countries needed significant additional financing, including obviously by the private sector and development partners, but for most members of the United Nations, it can be done through domestic action. Obviously, whether Canada reaches the SDGs is very much dependent on the Canadian government. But that actually goes much wider to, maybe we're talking about the 50 or so low-income countries who really need the domestic resource mobilization and the significant extra financing from externally and getting the governance right and getting the investment and what have you. But for a lot of countries in the middle, 3, 4, 5% of GDP extra revenue raising could make a massive difference to the SDGs. Plus a bit of reorganizing of budgets and reprioritizing could make a massive difference. So for most of the membership, an awful lot of this is in your own hands. It really, not easy, politically very difficult raising taxes, but an awful lot of this is in your own hands. Needs to be supplemented by fiscal stimulus, all the rest of it, but so much of this is domestic policy, really is.
Thank you very much, Robert. And now I'd like to turn to Madam Sakiko Fukuda-Par to react to the comments from the floor. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your remarks about our work on the voluntary national reviews. Indeed, this is really just staring at us in our face because countries are really committed to undertaking these voluntary national reviews, and I think this is one of the successes of the SDG, the agenda and the process. At the same time, let's just make much more effective use of this instrument, which has been put in place, in fact, for countries to reflect themselves, whether they have done well or as well as they can, and to share experiences so that we can make a real change. And the challenge of the SD agenda is this transformative challenge, not just business as usual. Many of the goals are do not need just acceleration. They're actually going backwards. So there's a need to change direction. So there's a real need to learn from what we have been doing to see what we can do, not just better, but differently. And I think this cannot be done. That kind of learning cannot be done by someone telling you what to do. So I think the whole spirit of the voluntary national reviews is it is a kind of a self-learning process in order to do something differently. And the documents that we have are, some of them are several hundred pages long, so you sort of wonder how much it takes to digest all of this. And so much more focused, maybe a 10-page issues paper with a 10-page action plan is what is needed, and being much more forthright about things that have worked, but also things that have not worked. And what I think is most disturbing is not just the sort of the descriptive and lengthy nature of the documents, but the fact that there are no loop-back mechanisms, that there are second VNRs being submitted that do not reflect back on what the first report, country report, actually reported. To say, well, you know, we found in the first review that certain things worked well, so we've multiplied, we've replicated this and so forth. And the secondly, I mean, Mr. Ambassador, you referred to having a kind of a way of weighing yourself and seeing how well ECOSOC has done. I think the point is that unless there is also a kind of a pressure from others to say, well, there are different ways that you can do this, and therefore a dialogue with civil society during the process of preparation, I think that's, that discipline may be, I mean, I think that kind of alternative analysis that are being voiced, I think, would help motivate that self-weighing and self-monitoring process. I think that taking really serious thought to developing a new approach to this very valuable process, the VNRs, would be a sort of a low-hanging fruit, so to speak, in governments using an instrument that they already have, but doing it more, using that tool more effectively. But before, if I may, I close here. I would also like to comment on the issues that have been raised about domestic resource mobilization and issues of fair taxation. I mean, nobody has mentioned the term debt. Now, obviously, there is a question of domestic resource mobilization, but we also face a situation where dozens of countries are in debt distress or at risk of falling into debt distress, and they cannot get out of it because of accumulated debt. And I think we have another, we did not mention, I did not mention this in my earlier remarks, but one of the studies that we did conduct last year was on debt, in fact, for the last couple of years. And we find that the mechanisms that are in place today are the multilateral mechanisms that are in place today are simply not adequate to respond to the crisis that many countries are facing today, but have also faced in the past that have accumulated problems today. So I think that that is another thing that is obviously in urgent need as a way of moving to the future. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Professor. And I'd now like to turn to Celeste for her reaction to what you have heard from the floor. You have, please.
Thank you very much. I was reflecting on what I heard previously, and I would argue whether we have some clear mechanisms to measure what we are doing. For example, science provides us with clear evidence that our emissions of carbon dioxide are increasing, regardless of what the countries have committed to do. In fact, the atmosphere shows something different. So I think that science gives us the possibility to seek for measurements of different variables to see whether we are tackling or not our sustainable development goals, either directly or indirectly. In terms of my agency, for sure, we are not doing any good. And so I would say, and replicating the urgency of the colleague from Mexico, that we should be more aggressive and we should be more ambitious, because we do have elements to recognize that we are not going in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Celeste. And now I'd like to turn to Amandeep, to you, to hear your reaction, your feedback.
Thank you. I don't know if there was a specific remark addressed to me, but just reflecting on what I've heard in the room, I think the important point to be noted about science, technology, and innovation is that those are the foundations of future growth. So we've all heard of the middle income trap. Now, if today countries do not invest in innovation ecosystems, do not create human capital, human resources around emerging technologies, then they are undermining future growth. They'll be dependent on boom and bust cycles with resources. They would be dependent, they would be less resilient to global shocks of the kinds that we've seen recently. So investments in STI, in digital technologies, are investments in the future. They are investments in resilience. And in fact, they are critical to our global goals. If we only rely on, we only focus on fossil fuels, that's a huge chunk, that's very important, but then we also have to invest in green technologies, in smart grids, in moving to a circular economy, in making sure that there is behavioral change in terms of consumption patterns, and that would require engagement with large numbers of people, both in the global north and in the global south. And none of that can be done without technology. The macro aspect of this, the digital cooperation aspect of this, is that these technologies, they cross borders, they have positive and negative fallout across borders, so you require international collaboration. And the last thing you want is a greater competition around those technologies and adding to the list of existing worries that you have with regard to peace and security, disarmament and arms control, adding to those worries with additional worries coming out of emerging technology. So I think that's the kind of lens we should have as we look at the Summit of the Future, the Global Digital Compact inside. I would conclude by saying, this aspect of innovation for the SDGs, often in this building, we focused on solutions. Let's find a solution for malaria. Let's find a solution for clean water, and then see if it scales. I think we have to reverse this. We have to see what works at scale. In a sense, it's like, monoculture does not scale, but a forest scales. So if you have more diverse participation in the STI ecosystem, more diverse participation in solving problems for the SDGs, the so-called localization of SDGs issues, then you can have global scale effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Amandeep. And I thank all distinguished panelists for their very active engagement into the discussions. And also I thank all delegations for their very interesting and to-the-point questions. So, dear colleagues, this brings us to the end of this session. And I'll now briefly pause the meeting to allow the podium to be rearranged for the closing of the segment. Thank you very much. Please remain seated. Dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, excellencies, we have reached the end of our discussions for the 2024 coordination segment. I am glad to give the floor to Mr. Li Junhua, Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, to deliver his closing remarks. You have the floor, USG.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Excellencies, distinguished participants and delegates. This coordination segment holds strategic significance as the first ECOSOC segment following the 2023 SDG Summit. Over the last 2 days, we have heard invaluable contributions that have significantly enhanced these discussions. We addressed a broad spectrum of issues pertinent to advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and responded to the salient mandates from the 2023 SDG Summit, the political declaration. The presentations and discussions reiterated our shared commitment to end poverty everywhere, combat the inequalities, and build peaceful societies that leave no one behind. Global economic challenges threaten SDG progress, with tight financing conditions, debt vulnerabilities, and slowing trade forecasted in 2024. Geopolitical tensions and the risk of the extreme weather also pose the further threats. The gap between the developed and the developing economies is widening, marked by the decreasing unemployment in developed economies, but persistently high rates in the developing regions. Historically, the high food prices and the high cost of the living remained a critical concern, especially to the countries in vulnerable situations. Developing economies faced subdued growth, high unemployment, and stagnant wages, urging increased investment in education, health, and infrastructure. Governments must pursue the innovations and the green transition to foster sustainable growth, employment, and livelihoods. International cooperation must be geared to support economies in vulnerable physical situations, to help to shift them towards the inclusive, sustainable development. In the words of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I quote, "Unless we act now, the 2030 Agenda will become the epitaph for a world that might have been," end of quote. Member states must utilize the ECOSOC system to its full potential to advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Vice President, dear colleagues, despite the challenges, we know what needs to be done. Translating commitments into concrete policies, budgets, and investment portfolios is one such step. And timely and high-quality data remain fundamental to measuring progress and guidance. Member states have signaled the way forward in the political declaration of the SDG Summit. Immediate action is crucial to accelerate the achievement of the 2030 Agenda beyond the current 15% implementation rate. With the 2030 deadline just now over the 6 years away, we are in a race against time. The outcomes of these deliberations will inform our collective efforts towards a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future. Your recommendations have provided valuable guidance on how the ECOSOC system can enhance the contribution. You have pointed out to move forward a comprehensive strategy involving political will, technology, and resources to achieve the SDGs, in particular, eradicating poverty. Your recommendations will help to inform discussions in the lead-up to and during the upcoming milestone events in 2024, including the High-Level Political Forum and the Summit of the Future. I would like to thank you for the guidance and the direction that you've provided. I also take this opportunity to express gratitude for the contribution and support by UN entities and the secretariats of the ECOSOC subsidiary bodies in the preparations for this segment. With the invaluable contributions from across the UN systems, DESA's dedicated UN system SDG implementation database continues to provide a gateway to the impressive work of the UN system to support countries in their efforts to deliver the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development on the ground. I would like to also express our gratitude to you, Mr. Ambassador, and your team for your invaluable guidance and leadership in preparation for this segment. Dear colleagues, the UN system stands ready to support the countries in their efforts to expedite the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, accelerate the eradication of the poverty, and address the multiple challenges facing our world. I thank you.
I thank the Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs for his closing remarks. And with your permission, I would like to proceed with my closing remarks. Dear Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to express my heartfelt appreciation to all participants in this year's coordination segment of the Economic and Social Council. Over the past 2 days, our discussions have been highly productive and impactful, addressing a diverse array of issues critical for expediting the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. At the SDG Summit in September, we recognized that transformative action to accelerate SDG implementation must take priority in our work and actions. We have reviewed and guided the work of the ECOSOC system for an effective follow-up to the political declaration and in preparation for the coming review of the implementation at the HLPF in July. Your valuable inputs to the discussions have significantly contributed to guiding an effective implementation of sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions to accelerate the realization of the 2030 Agenda. Dear colleagues, this year we had fruitful discussions on the advancement of the SDGs, with particular focus on those that will be under review in July, namely SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and SDG 17, partnership for the goals. There are a few points that I would like to highlight from our discussions. This segment witnessed a number of rich discussions focusing on the SDGs to be reviewed at the 2024 HLPF. However, the interlinkages between these and other SDGs, and also with major trends such as technological advancement and population dynamics, were front and center throughout the segment. Coordination is key to break silos and tap on the interlinkages to create multiplier effects in our action to achieve the 2030 Agenda. In our discussions on urgent action to eradicate poverty and hunger and to develop sustainable food system, we spoke about the importance of the interconnectedness of these two issues and the need to address them together. But this will not suffice unless we recognize the interlinkages with climate action and the need for gender-responsive and evidence-based policies. We must build strong, effective, and just institutions at the national and international levels, taking integrated approaches and strengthening coordination of efforts. We spoke about the needs to rebuild social and political trust in institutions and among citizens as a foundation of peace and sustainable development. We also fall behind in our goals in developing capacity in public institutions and elsewhere is hindered. And if our efforts to strengthen the statistical system to provide quality data for policy planning and implementation are hampered, including all those groups of society that are often most vulnerable. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda at all levels needs to embed a rights-based approach to ensure dignity, opportunity, and prosperity for all peoples. If we do not urgently and decisively act to protect our planet, no one's aspirations can be achieved. We spoke about the need to implement our agreements in a coordinated manner so that no resource is wasted. We can reverse the alarming trends of biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. The acceleration of climate goal implementation is facilitated through gender-responsive climate action that empowers women and girls. Recognizing non-economic loss and damage in climate finance is a critical aspect of this approach. Moreover, green technologies, such as mature technologies like biomass and solar photovoltaics, provide straightforward solutions, while emerging technologies like green hydrogen offer room for innovation. Data processing technologies, AI and blockchain can mitigate environmental impacts in production processes. Science, technology, and innovation will be fundamental in every way to further our efforts. We also discussed the importance to close the digital gap and to develop AI governance mechanisms that embed ethical and human rights considerations. This will create safe digital spaces, free of discrimination, hate, and harness the benefits of the digital era responsibly and effectively by all. Achieving a greener future requires a comprehensive approach, encompassing resilient infrastructure, technology acquisition, capacity building, coordination of international partnerships, and the reform of the international financial system. Increased investment in climate action enhances countries' resilience against climate shocks, reducing the risk of climate-related conflicts. We were exposed to the depth of the work of the Council's solidarity bodies, subsidiary bodies, and heard from the executive secretaries of regional commissions and chairs of functional commissions and expert bodies how they are advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda within the scope of their respective mandates, including strengthening global efforts in crime prevention, rule of law, equal access to justice to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, transforming public sector institutions through agility, data-driven decision-making, and inclusive policies to enhance governance and social justice, harnessing the power of science, technology, and innovation to overcome developmental challenges, close the gender-digital divide, and promote equitable growth, addressing demographic dynamics, climate change, and leveraging digital innovation as critical to achieving sustainable development goals, promoting international cooperation in tax matters, safe management and transport of chemicals, and the implementation of high-quality, accessible data for informed decision-making as well as economic, social, and cultural rights to support social inclusion, economic prosperity, health, and sustainability of our planet. Financing is a crucial enabler for these transformations to take place. We spoke about the need for an international financial system that creates the conditions for countries to implement sustainable and coherent policies for the SDGs. High level of debt, barriers to participation in supply chains and trade, or resources drained by illicit financial flows and other organized and transnational crime forms must be addressed. There is also the need for international mechanisms that promote technology and diffusion and sharing, especially for developing countries. International cooperation is fundamental to create these enabling conditions and allow each country to perform at their best and their people's aspiration to be achieved. Fostering partnership and dialogue are critical to take the required urgent action and accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, leaving no one behind. Dear colleagues, we have shown in the last 2 days that we can elevate global cooperation and work together to deliver concrete path to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In this time of multiple global crises, and as we approach the summit of the future, it is imperative that we bolster international solidarity and strengthen coordinated efforts to address these complex global challenges. The summit of the future will be important to decisively strengthen the alignment of our efforts with the aspiration of the 2030 Agenda. I therefore confident that our discussions and recommendations to further coordinate it on comprehensive approaches and recognizing synergies to create multiplier effects that propel us towards the 2030 Agenda will significantly contribute to the summit discussions and outcomes. I anticipate that our deliberations will pave the way for major breakthroughs in our collective efforts towards creating a better and sustainable world. distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Before I conclude, I would like to once again thank all participants and experts, express my deep gratitude to the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, led by you, Mr. Undersecretary General, and the Department for General Assembly and Conference Management for their dedicated work throughout the preparation and conduct of the meeting of the coordination segment. I'd also like to express my sincere appreciation to all interpreters for their invaluable contribution. I thank you. Dear colleagues, with this, the coordination segment of the 2024 session of the Economic Social Council is concluded. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.